Excellent. Well, why don't we get started on this beautiful spring day in Ohio? Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Rose Feeney and I'm president-elect of the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. The CMBA's mission is centered on promoting the rule of law and being the go-to entity on matters of law and justice. One way we strive to fulfill our mission is by creating opportunities for the open and civil exchange of ideas and viewpoints across a vast array of topics, both for our members and the community at large. Our hot talks, which we're doing today, are one opportunity for the civil and informed conversations about these topics. In today's talk, the CMBA is compelled to address the Plain Dealer Editorial Board's March 28th piece, which criticized the Justice Center Executive Steering Committee's March 25th unanimous vote to proceed with the design, build, delivery method for building the new county jail. And just to clarify, it was only a decision on the delivery method. The decision to proceed with the jail project itself was made several months ago after much deliberation. The March 28th editorial from the Plain Dealer argues that design build is less transparent and less competitive, and therefore taxpayers should be concerned. We at the Metropolitan Bar Association do not believe that that is an accurate depiction of our modern project delivery models that have been available in the state of Ohio since 2011, when the General Assembly did adopt the Ohio Construction Reform Act. So we convened this panel today to provide more accurate information to the public. And let me introduce our panel who is going to engage in this discussion. First, we have Joe Cleves, who is a partner in the Cincinnati office of Taft, where he practices in the firm's construction and real estate groups. Joe has extensive experience in lean construction, a practice designed to maximize value and minimize waste through the construction process, and with integrated project delivery, IPD, a process uniquely suited to put lean construction principles into practice. Joe has consulted on multi-million-dollar developments across the nation, incorporating IPD as a means to delivering value to all phases of design, fabrication, and construction. Aside from IPD, Joe is highly experienced in developing and revising contract documents and procedures, and has negotiated and closed on numerous construction contracts, joint venture agreements, and subcontracts. Joe has been recognized by Best Lawyers in America since 2012 and was named Lawyer of the Year in 2013 in Cincinnati for construction law. He is also named a Fellow of the Construction Lawyer Society of America. Joe is also on the National Board of Cogents Alliance, which we'll get to in a minute. Next, our next panelist is Cynthia Lietzen. She is the Vice President of Capital, Construction, and Facilities at Cuyahoga Community College, Tri-C. She is responsible for maintaining, improving, and repurposing existing facilities and for developing new facilities, leased and owned, and managing capital assets. She oversees services including facilities and operations maintenance, facility construction and renovation, infrastructure replacement of furnishings and equipment, site development, college-wide master planning, sustainability, real estate services, and asset management. Ms. Lietzen's professional and organizational involvement includes serving as a member to the Greater Cleveland Partnership, Construction Diversity and Inclusion Owner Group, Construction Engineering Society, Cogents Alliance, where she is also on the board here in Cleveland, Construction Owners Association of America, Construction Management Association of America, and the ACE Mentor Program as a board member and volunteer. So I mentioned Cogents Alliance with respect to both Joe and Cindy. Cogents Alliance is a national organization whose goal is to transform the design and construction industry. Cogents represents the breadth of industry stakeholders, owners, architects, engineers, construction trades, and other affiliates. Cogence is united by a drive to improve project delivery and outcomes, and believes that a team-based project delivery method creates opportunities for all the partners to succeed. And you'll learn later as we talk why that unification of approach is playing into our modern project delivery models. And finally, Catherine Tertier comes to us from Ohio, Common Cause, Ohio, and she is the executive director. Most of us know Common Cause Ohio is a grassroots organization devoted to open and accountable government. As a public interest lobbyist, Catherine promotes access to the ballot and open government at the Ohio State House. Catherine coordinates the Fair Districts Equal Fair Elections Coalition, which work together to successfully pass state legislative and congressional redistricting reform. She is on the steering committee of the Ohio Voter Rights Coalition and was the director of Ohio Citizen Action's Money and Politics Project for 15 years. In 2006, Catherine received the Spirit of Democracy Award from the Ohio Secretary of State. So let's jump in because we have an ambitious agenda today. Joe will lay the legal framework for our dialogue. Cindy, representing the owner's perspective, and she is a public owner, which is very relevant since we, the impetus for this dialogue is the county jail, a public project. And she's going to provide us with examples and insights within that framework. And while Catherine has acknowledged in our preparations and said, are you sure I'm the right person to be on this panel? She is not an expert in construction, but she is going to bring to this panel the questions that the public has for these models. So we are so pleased that all of you have participated today. Thank you so much for joining us for this important dialogue. And Catherine, we look forward to a lot of the redistricting work that we're reading about is, in the pipeline here. All very anxious about that in Ohio. All right, so Joe, take it away for us to talk a little bit about the traditional project delivery models first that had been utilized in Ohio for quite some time, and so that we can understand where we were and where we are going.
Certainly. Thank you, Rose. Multi-prime contracting, if we could go to the next slide, please, was enacted in Ohio in the 1870s. And under this methodology, the designer completes a design and then participates with the owner in bidding out the work among prime contractors. And that would be, electrical, mechanical, plumbing, structure, drywall, etc. And the premise is that the owner gets the best product by price competition. And so price is the sole criterion for selection. And, I based on my experience, I can say that this is a tremendously flawed analysis. The problems are that it treats the construction process as if it were a sales process, a transaction, going into a store and buying a product, when in fact, it's well proven that construction is best served by viable and good relationships between the players. For instance, the architect is not a professional builder and does not know building the way the construction builders do. And so they're going to complete a design in isolation that's not going to adequately address the needs of the owner. It's not going to be complete. We then have the prime contractors bidding on that design in a matter of 2 weeks, when the design took about 4 months to create. They're not going to have full and complete knowledge. And so, the whole process, it creates mistakes on scope, about schedule, and about coordination between the various contractors. The process is then run by an inexperienced owner, and it results in delays and disputes. Anecdotally, 40% of the Ohio State projects that were delivered under this methodology in the recent decade or two resulted in litigation just because of the inherent inefficiencies of this process. Next slide. An alternative to the owner running the project itself is to hire a construction manager as advisor. And in this sequence, the belief is that with that constructability insight, that management insight of the construction manager, the owner can overcome the deficiencies of handling a project all by itself. And while this is marginally true, it does not fundamentally address the flaws of having prime contractors in the field without an experienced construction professional controlling the delivery of their product. The construction manager does not hold their contracts, does not pay them, and thus has limited authority over their performance. And I can say in all my years in practice, the two projects that have resulted in significant cost overruns for owners, one public, one private, have been under this methodology where $10 million projects resulted in 12 million plus in expenses. The construction managers just doesn't have the authority to manage the team. And when problems arise, they step back and kind of brush their hands and say, there's nothing we can do about this. Next slide, please.
Or Joe, why don't we stop there for a couple of questions, just clarifying questions so we understand. And again, Catherine, jump in at any time. But so before you get to modern project delivery models, and if we can go back a slide, thank you. Joe, you mentioned that under these two traditional models, the multi-prime and the construction manager as advisor, that we've got that design professional, we've got the architect who is creating the drawings, in essence, for our general audience out there, the blueprints, that will be used for the project. That architect, did I hear you say that a contractor is not involved in that process? And when the rubber hits the road and the project is going forward, have you or Cindy, have you come upon instances where it was a problem that you didn't have that construction professional at the table with the architect to say, well, that's not the best way to go about it. That's going to run up costs. Talk to us a little bit about that.
That's absolutely right. That's a little more granular way of expressing it. But again, the contractors know the best way to install. And frequently they'll have great ideas about, well, have you thought about doing it this way? If we use this material, it'll be stronger and give a better result. Or maybe if we realign the delivery sequencing, we can speed things up and still reach the same goal for the owner. Oftentimes, there'll be questions that'll be created by the design. So the design is never complete. And so in this process, that incomplete design is put out for bid. And so the contractors have to make assumptions when they put together their bids. And oftentimes they'll bid with aggressive assumptions. And then when the assumptions turn out not to be correct, then they flood the owner with change orders. So that is part of the dynamic that leads to cost overruns in this model.
That's an interesting, since you mentioned change orders, Joe, and I know locally, and I know you're from Cincinnati, so you're not as tuned into, some of the things that may have happened in Cuyahoga County and Cleveland, but change orders kind of, is a little red flag for us here in Cuyahoga County because it was a vehicle that was used by contractors to exceed that initial cost of the project. And is that something you're saying, may legitimately happen, but is there that potential for the change order to be misused in that context?
Absolutely. When you have a completed design that's then bid, and particularly in the public sector, I have found that there are contractors who will aggressively bid to win the project as a matter of course, as a matter of routine, and then just flood the owner and the architect with requests for change orders. I mean, every little variance that they need to introduce to the plans to make the construction work, becomes a change order and an increased cost. So some
Yeah.
will play the system cynically to the detriment of the public owner.
And thank you for that. And by, the corruption, I was referring to the 2008, 2009, when we had Jimmy DeMora and a number of public officials that were indicted and, in prison today. Cindy, I see you nodding. Did you want to jump in?
I did. So I've been able to experience a few of this model as well, at least 3 projects. And again, I agree with what, Joe's been saying, in general, have lived that where, again, these are very, very complex projects. It could be, a $35 million building from scratch or a rebuild, a renovation. And you have hundreds and just, hundreds of documents and layers of documents. And again, all of this is, it's put out there for bidding, and it's just, people are aggressive in their costs. And, it seems like does not always, reading through all of those documents, documents are not perfect. And construction is not a perfect process. So, you have this set of huge documents and aggressively looked at by pricing, and those folks have not had a voice in this. They've not had a voice in influencing how, the constructability and the design. So we know there's going to be inconsistencies in the drawings and in the process, and it sets up not only for a tremendous amount of change orders, which each cost money, but also a lot of confrontational. And then again, you have the owner, who is the least technical. The goal of the project, what you want to do for your institution, but you're the least technical from a construction standpoint. And even when you have a CMA involved, or the agent, the manager, construction manager agent involved, they're a consultant, and they try very hard to do a very good job at helping you manage the technical. But ultimately, there's a lot that the owner cannot influence.
Thank you, Cindy. And as I'm listening to both of you talk, one of the things that I'm thinking about and trying to understand, and I think we need to talk with, for our audience, the question, these multiple, as we see the diagram that's up here, both on this slide and the previous slide, we talk a lot about these prime contractors. But talk to us about, so let's talk about transparency. Does the owner, do we see what goes into the numbers, the contract numbers that the contractors put in? So in other words, are we getting to see the budgets and how much the subs are going to cost? Or is that an opportunity where the contractor gives us their number, and they may have built in a wide profit margin for themselves in those numbers, since the owner is not looking at the actual sub bids?
Well, absolutely, Rose, because the problem is this system is designed to force the contractors, even the good ones, to work to optimize the project for their own benefit and not for the owner's benefit. In other words, they're always prey to things that may go wrong with their schedule, their performance, because of something else another will do that they can't control. And so automatically they will build in margins based on inefficiency and labor performance based on past projects. And that could be, they've scheduled a crew for a particular week, and the work that they need in place to begin their performance is not ready in time or needs to be corrected. And so then that crew sits idle. That's just one example of how they tend to curl up in this little ball in a self-defensive posture, and they do add margins and different layers to their project to perfect themselves from mistakes that others make that can cost their performance and hurt their profitability.
And and I would jump in there as well, just to say, you do have scope reviews, on the project initially after the bidding. But again, these are typically very complex, large projects, and you can't possibly go through the entire, designs, and you try to hit the key points. You try to make sure there's a really thorough understanding, of what was bid and of the project itself. But you just sort of see that lump sum. You don't necessarily see the breakdown, and you don't necessarily have any influence on those subcontractors. You could have somebody that, builds in a lot of margin, and you could also have somebody that low bids it and doesn't have enough margin. And it's only over time that you can start to figure that out sometimes, as you see sort of the behavior of the project.
I guess also, Rose, in further response to your question, the only thing the owner sees from these prime contractors is their final number, their total budget. So there's no understanding of how that number is built. I mean, each one of these prime contractors will have numerous suppliers and subcontractors that are part of that performance. And so the owner has no basis to do cost benchmarking, for instance, to determine whether a particular mechanical supplier or subcontractor is pricing their work consistent with historical data on similar projects. So it just leaves so many unknowns for the owner.
And Joe, is there, like, in some of these more specialized areas, or in perhaps an area of Ohio where there are not as many specialized contractors, or is there a scenario where there could be collusion in putting forward, those sealed bids that is possible within these traditional processes?
Historically, that has occurred. I mean, it's not rampant, but I think public agencies across this country are generally tend to be extraordinarily vigilant about that sort of occurrence, because it has been proven to happen. People do get indicted, people do go to jail. Doesn't happen on anywhere near every project or the majority of projects, but it does occur.
So one of the things that I always think that the public, we use phrases like sealed bid, and sometimes folks think they understand it. And but Joe, I was hoping that you could jump in and just explain what that means a little bit.
So, the architect will publish for bidding purposes their plans. I mean, they will send it around, they'll publish it in a public venue, they'll send it around to interested bidders, and it'll be a stack of plans. It could be inches thick. The prime contractor or sub will then take those plans and thoroughly analyze it with their team, and their team would be the subcontractors and suppliers and all who would comprise their performance. They go through, analyze it, they come back with their individual bids for each aspect of the work. Then the prime contractor, let's say it's mechanical, will sum total those bids. They'll add in their profit margin, their cost for performance, trailers and things like that. And they'll give the owner a number, and they'll put that in an envelope and seal it. And so then when the owner and the architect go to evaluate the bids for the mechanical work on that project, they will open all those bids submitted by the mechanical contractors, and they will compare. They will put them out on a table and compare them one by one. And they're bound by law under this methodology to pick the best or lowest price, regardless of their understanding of the capability of that bidder to actually carry through with the performance.
One of the things I'm sure that we're all thinking about, Jimmy DeMora suggesting, like caught him on tape, basically. Jimmy DeMora suggesting that, in fact, you bid low and you make up the money with change orders.
Mm-hmm.
Which gets
Yes.
into a little bit about what Rose was talking about with collusion.
That absolutely occurs. In fact, I've run into a contractor, not in the state of Ohio, but their preferred customer is counties in the state of Kentucky and all the different governmental entities that comprise county bodies. And they're known for that, exactly that sort of performance. They'll bid low, and then every single discrepancy in the drawings or anything that's incomplete or erroneous becomes the basis for a change order. And so on a $5 or $10 million job, they may have hundreds of change orders,
Right.
which is well above the norm. But that's how they cover their true costs and actually make money on the projects, and get more and more projects because they come in as the low bidder.
Good. Thank you for that clarification and those questions, Catherine. My last question before we move on to the modern project delivery models, it relates to the Spearman doctrine. And Joe, for the sake of the general public, can you just in a few words summarize, a public owner has that liability and responsibility with respect to the architect's drawings. Because that, in my mind, that's also another really big consideration and potential liability for the owner. Can you just succinctly explain to the folks what that doctrine is?
Absolutely. In 1920, the Supreme Court ruled on a case and found that where the owner provides the design, since the contractor is not directly contracting with the architect, the owner stands in the place of the designer in terms of warranting that design or standing behind that design. So if the design is inadequate and results in mistakes in construction or extra costs, then the owner is liable to the contractor for those mistakes. And this, being for an entity that has no design expertise whatsoever.
Thank you. Good.
We got something. May I interject here? We have a chat comment, and it just calls me to point out that the sealed bid is also a lump sum bid. Sealed bids are common for all construction projects, even under the new Reform Act. It's just a question of, I guess, the layer at which the owner receives those sealed bids that we're talking about here. And it's the sealed bid on for these traditional projects comes with many layers underneath that the owner does not get to look at. Whereas in an open price model, which the newer methodologies allow for, the owner does have access to that information.
Thank you. Thank you for that. All right, let's move the discussion now to the construction law reform that happened. But I know we'll be bouncing back and forth between our traditional models versus the modern project delivery models. But just for the audience's benefit, the construction law reform started under Governor Strickland's administration and continued on through Governor Kasich's administration. So for, I believe it was about 2 years, the construction reform panel studied what was happening around the country, what was happening in the private sector as well as the public sector, and then issued its recommendations in 2009. And in fact, Ohio was one of the last 4 to consider these changes to our construction models that could be used in the public sector. And in fact, a lot of these newer models were used for well over 50 years. And then we do see that in House Bill 153, the General Assembly adopted the Ohio Construction Reform Act in 2011, and it has provided more tools in the toolbox for public entities. And I think if we want to bring the PowerPoint back up, Joe is going to help us go into some of these models.
Okay, thank you. Can you go back one slide, please? Okay, no, my bad. Advance again. Yeah, all right. So the methodology shown on the screen, design build, represents a significant advance in terms of the capability of the entire team to integrate an understanding of design, get a complete design, and then perform on that. The designer and the builder reside in one entity. And so generally it's a contractor who hires a designer to work under it, but they provide an integrated product. And so you get the builder works very, very closely with the designer during the process of design, providing feedback, getting cost estimating, and in general, going a long way toward eliminating or largely reducing mistakes and misunderstandings that lead to price increases. Below them, you will have the design consultants. So typically the architect is the designer as part of the design build. Underneath would be the engineers for mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and then the various contractors. And so these firms, because they're hired without a complete price or complete design, they can't price the product, they can't price the building, but they are price competitive in that they submit their fees at various levels, the key personnel that they will have for the project, the design concepts that they will advance, their statement for, sort of the back of the set costs, if you will. I mean, what are called general conditions. So fencing, toilets, utilities, roadways. I mean, just the things that provide the basis for the construction so that an owner knows, and can examine the various proposals to see if they're price competitive. They also would submit a preliminary schedule. The owner then ranks these firms based on the value of each proposal, and they enter into negotiations with the one that is designated as having the best proposal. In this best proposal, price is a factor, but it is not the only factor. And so we get an acknowledgement by this law of the fact that, again, you're not shopping as if you're at a Walmart when you're purchasing construction. It is not a transaction. It's best delivered in the context of understanding the overall relationships of the parties, and those relationships and the success of those relationships are what determine the ability to deliver a successful project for an owner. Did you want to pause here, Rose, with other questions, or should we move on?
Well, let me ask Cindy. Cindy, would you rather us move to the other modern project delivery models, or do you want to jump in here with some examples?
I'll jump in right now. So I guess I wanted to share that I had started in this role in charge of capital construction and facilities in late 2015. And so the college had done previously a lot of the CMA, the old method, and we had been getting ready to convert a lot of new work over. So we did, I was able to do a lot of benchmarking and talk to at least 5 to 6 different institutions, higher ed, who had been, again, because it was 2015 going into 2016, they already been doing it for 4 or 5 years. So it was really great to be able to talk to both 2- and 4-year schools, especially 4-year schools that had been doing it, and get a feel for that. I also talked with a lot of local firms, all types of firms, construction and architectural consultants, and just to get different takes on what's working, what's tweaked. And so we have just recently, we've just completed almost done with the last 2, but we're in the process on 5 design builds. And primarily the first 4 were really, we were just sort of dipping in slowly because we're learning this method. The state does a great job of, encouraging and these type of delivery methods, but also putting some guidelines and some rules out there in the manuals. And so we did 4 in infrastructure. So infrastructure, your roofs, your parking lots, your electrical panels, flooring, restroom kind of renovation. So it's a good area where we have a lot of standards. So we did the bridging criteria, documents. We had the criteria architect and publish our standards and what we're looking for in this design build. And then we selected, as Joe laid out, we selected the design builder, and then they, using our standards, they then finished off those designs and worked with us. And it's a constant review. constantly meeting. So you're, every other week for like 2-3 years, you're sitting down and it's very open and you're going through the process of where is the design, the cost estimating, the technical. And so it's been a very good learning process for us. And it's been a good method. And we, one of the 4-year schools had started using design build on some of their other academic buildings. And so we've also we've done one small lab project and that just finished up last year, and it went very well. So I've been very successful with it.
Great. And Cindy, in some of our preparation conversations, you mentioned that when you went into your role and you were doing your due diligence in evaluating what these models were, what they entailed, you were getting questions from the state. Is that about, why aren't you using these models more? Is that, tell us your story there.
So a couple different things. We were, like I said, I was meeting and interviewing, and at the same time we were doing a couple of the old method of the CMA model. And then so that's where we got just some questions like, when are you going to start switching over? And we definitely told them, you're going to see this, it is coming. And we have just in the last 4 years, we've done close to 20 projects, and 13 of those were either CM at risk or design build. And then we've also had a few, general contracting. And so it is something that it's encouraged. There's a lot of good, like I said, guidelines out there from the state. And so one particular institution, a very large institution, did share with us that, again, as they cut over in the first 5 years to some of these newer methods, they went from having, maybe a 30+%, 40+% in litigation to nothing in litigation. And so that was very interesting. And we've seen some of that from our old CMA, to, today. So.
And which is pretty remarkable of a percentage of being involved in litigation. And I think when Joe was going over that framework, when in the PowerPoint, when we see the multiple prime contracts and the owner holding that individual contract with each contractor, when there's a dispute that arises with one and that takes the project off course, then it disrupts, and that's when it results in all this litigation for the whole project and results in delays, budget overruns. So that organization shared with you that they went from, was it a 30% cases in litigation to 0?
Right, correct. That's
which is quite remarkable.
And you can see, it's having a design builder, you can see that you have this full team, and you can sit down as you're developing, the design is being finished off, and as you're going into the bidding phases, and you're seeing all the different packages, and you see the engineers and everyone sitting around the table collaboratively having input into the drawings. And again, the construction folks can influence the design because that designer is working for them, and you get a better drawing. And I think you end up with firms that understand the drawings better. And again, the owner has to understand there's, the design builder still factors in with the state formula contingency as well. And so does the owner, because I have old buildings, 1960, you have unknown things and surprises that do happen. So that still has to happen from a total budget standpoint, but you could just see the collaboration of the group. And it's definitely very proactive.
And so just to summarize, I heard a couple of things there in what you said, Cindy. When we think of that traditional model, the project is very linear. So you have the architect who has to develop the drawings. They're doing it not with significant, if any, input from the practical contractor. They have to finish those drawings. And so the time period that it takes, and then they go out and get the bid based upon those drawings. And so we don't have that collaboration, and it's a longer time frame. Is that what you're sharing with us too, for the whole project? Because you don't have that interdisciplinary team working early in the project together.
Great. Correct. Good summary. Yep.
Rose, we've got a couple of questions here. Should we take a moment to address these?
Sure. And then we'll jump into their CMR at risk. And so let's see, bail reformation is what is needed. How many prisoners do we really need? All right. So Mr. Bryant, we are going to leave that to a separate hot talk or discussion. Today we're focusing on the project delivery model, the methodology itself. There are so many of the public meetings that have happened as part of the Justice Center Steering Committee, and they're all available to the public on the Cuyahoga County website. I encourage you, Google Justice Center Executive Committee Steering Committee, and all of the public sessions which have been held are there for you to review with all of those details to go over that jail project, and there's more to come. All right, our next question, can you describe the Bureau of Adult Detention's role in this process? That might be, so I think that also is specifically for our jail project. And so we're, again, they're going to defer that question. And then which method provides the overall lowest price to the taxpayer? Let's jump in there. Good question. Joe, pick up please with the construction manager at risk and do your overview, and then we can talk a little bit more about details and also equity and inclusion, which we want to get to.
Okay, absolutely. Can we have the PowerPoint back up on the screen? Okay, and if you could go to the slide that says construction manager at risk. Okay, great. So in this model, there is still a bifurcated responsibility for the project. The architect is under separate contract with the owner, but the owner hires a construction manager. And the construction manager then is responsible for coordinating both the delivery of design and construction. Although they're not responsible for the designer, they're involved early in the process, and they provide that sort of practical builder feedback as the process evolves from schematic to design development to the actual construction drawings. They provide cost estimating so that the owner has an idea of how the budget is evolving as the design advances. And then the construction manager, who is an expert in construction, holds the trade contracts that result in the individual deliveries. So again, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, etc. As a chat comment pointed out earlier, these are, well, the construction manager is selected by a process very similar to the design builder. So they give their fees, their key people, their general conditions pricing, their schedule. But the trades will submit a sealed bid, but they will also be under total transparency in terms of their costs, so that the owner can go through and with the construction manager and analyze the particular components of the bid. They can do cost benchmarking to ensure that the right numbers are in the right places. All in all, this is a dramatic improvement over, what we call the traditional methodologies, where the owner had the key contracts in its hands. If I had to guess, but if I had to pick between construction manager at risk and design build, I would say that the best value and therefore the lowest cost is delivered by design build. The reason being, with construction manager at risk, you still have bifurcated contracts, so that the owner, the design is delivered under one contract with the owner, and then the construction is delivered under a separate contract with the owner. There's still some opportunities for misunderstandings. If problems occur, there's finger pointing. The owner is still standing behind the design, in this case, to the construction manager. You eliminate finger pointing because there's only one source for anything that goes wrong in design build, and that's the design builder. So it's just a superior methodology, and that's why so many public owners are trending to use that methodology.
And Joe, I'll just pipe in here. In a lot of the research and study, I see that the question has come in from the audience, which project delivery model is the best? But really, we've got to study every project. And Cindy, maybe you can weigh in here.
Sure.
I think, in the components that construction manager at risk and design build bring to the public sector are, those things that we're so concerned about, and that is cost and that is transparency. So both of these models, through the guaranteed maximum price, that guaranteed maximum price has to be created, and then the design builder or the construction manager at risk has to live within that guaranteed maximum price. Now, the guaranteed maximum price, it includes the contingency element, because like Cindy said, she's working with old buildings and we don't know what's going to happen. So we have to have an allowance for those contingencies, and that's built into the budget. But I know, working in the public sector, that gives us, good confidence in the project with that guaranteed maximum price. And then the open book and in fact, in Cuyahoga County, that's a requirement that those numbers that are put together by our subs have to be disclosed. And so versus the traditional methodology where we didn't see what the subcontractor numbers were, and the general contractor can just give us that one lump sum figure. We're in the design build and the construction manager at risk, the open book does allow us to get to see those subcontractor numbers. But Cindy, you have more practical experience.
So when we are doing both, we've done, like I said, we've done about 8 CM at risk, and we have done about 5 design builds, just finishing up a couple of them now. And the thing that is so significantly different is, as you're doing that budget, as you're doing that GMP, and you have the whole team involved from a pre-construction standpoint, you're estimating it, you can make decisions, and then ultimately, the bidding process, every owner's technical capabilities is certainly different. Then you have differences by project. And so in general, I would say that CMR had been something we've been using heavier, and we will probably continue to have use, because we've been very happy on certain buildings. That might be an academic building or a landmark, maybe historical type of building. For us, we tend to sometimes want to keep that design control. But on the other hand, having now done 5 design builds, it's just a really smooth process as well. And you see the teams all collaborating, again, pre-construction, estimating, decisions, and so you get to the best kind of product. So from a total cost, total value, I do think that the newer methods have been more successful at getting in as much scope as you can for your dollars, keeping it on time, and keeping it to the budget. And certainly the complexity to having the one contract, whether it's the CMR with, there's 2 technically, with the CMR firm and the architect, or with design build, just the one. It simplifies that, and the construction manager at risk or the design builder is always, I find we've worked with 10 different firms that have done these type of new delivery methods, and they've all let us be in the process on the bidding. I can add suppliers to the list, I can remove suppliers. So there's a genuine, give and take, because we tend to be very involved in that process. My team does, but every owner is slightly different.
If I could point out real quickly, I almost laughed when you said new methods. They're only new in the state of Ohio for governmental projects. I mean, we finally caught up with most of the rest of the country. And one other little tidbit in favor of design build, because of the seamless contracting and sort of delivery between designer and builder that results in, it chops many, many months off of the delivery of the schedule. And so there are big cost savings, because you don't have, the trailers and fences and utilities, et cetera, out there for all those months. I'm also getting a note here that, let me see, it's,
Yeah, let's, Catherine, jump in. You had a question.
So I wondered about this, and I kind of thought other people might. When I hear, guaranteed maximum price, there has to be a process for coming up with that maximum price. And I want to learn more about that, because it seems to me like if you create something's way high, that is a real challenge, and you could imagine people taking advantage of that and billing. And so I just wondered a little bit about that process and how open it is to the public.
Excellent question. Cindy, I see you nodding. Do you want to take that, or Joe? Either one.
I'll let Joe start and then I'll come in and comment.
well, would you mind repeating the question? I got momentarily distracted.
Were you reading the question in the chat, Joe? Catherine?
I was.
All right.
I was responding to the next question,
Right. and
formulating my response.
we were trying to be prepared, and I appreciate it, but that's why we wanted Catherine on the panel to pose some of these challenging questions for us too. So we'll get to the chat when we can. But Catherine is asking, because we've talked about it, the guaranteed maximum price. Talk to us a little bit about how we get to that guaranteed maximum price in the process.
So generally, well, understand that design goes through phases. You'll have the schematic design first, which is broad concepts, design development, the designer is putting more detail in there, and then the actual construction documents that provide the roadmap for the building as it is to unfold. Generally, the design documents do not have to be 100% complete for a construction manager or design builder and their team of subcontractors and suppliers to understand the design intent well enough to price it affirmatively and with confidence. And so it could be, depending on the scope of the project or the type of project, it could be 75% complete, it could be 90% complete. But somewhere in that range, most experienced design builders or construction managers will look at it and say, okay, we got this, we could put a number to this, and then they go back to the owner and say, here's my number, and here's the bases for that number, and then allow, Cynthia to go through the tremendous amount of detail and let them explain, what are the components, how they built that number from the ground up. And so the goal is that both sides of the equation, both the owner and the builder, have confidence in the number and confidence that the builder can deliver for the promised number.
Right.
Is there kind of a role for the public in determining that number?
Not directly. They're relying on the public officials who are ultimately put in place by elected representatives. So it's an indirect process, but certainly if they get too many wrong, those elected officials are not going to be elected much longer.
You have
Go
organization.
for it. I have another question.
I was going to say, you have, an organization has early on in the concept stages, they probably have done some sort of a feasibility review conceptually. And then from there you do cost it, you cost it again at very high levels, but you're trying to figure out, is this an old building? Do I have to bring it up to, 10 new codes? And you're costing out the design. Is it heavy in HVAC? So you have an estimate at a high level. And then from there, there's a budget process that you to make sure you've got everything in sort of that high level budget. You pick somebody, so in design build, and then they're going through the stages. So you're always checking in, you're sitting in these meetings, constantly checking in. They have multiple packages. So the plumbing and the flooring and the electrical, and they're building it up. They're working, say, with my construction director, and they figure out, so we have to ultimately come together. We know what our budget is. They know what it's pricing at. And you have to leave some room for that contingency. And then they're bidding all those packages in detail, but now they're bidding it from someone who's developed the technical package with a deeper knowledge and looking at the total value of those.
what I'll jump into, Catherine, it'll depend on what public agency you're dealing with and interfacing with, but many of those public entities, the staff will be coming to the board for approval of those GMPs. And in that process, you will see what those estimates are broken down by line item. So that definitely, there's a role for public to attend those public meetings where, you know, the projects are being discussed. And so that, you know, would be one opportunity. And since our time is running short, and we can't leave this conversation without getting to some of the good work that Cindy has to share with us regarding equity and inclusion, especially, you know, as Ibram Kendi calls us to look at the policies we have in place to address, you know, systematic racism. Cindy, share with us some of the numbers, some of the efforts you've done, and how the modern project delivery models have helped with this work.
Sure. So, you know, again, we've always been very committed to making sure that we are posting on when upcoming work is coming. If we're going to go through a heavy period, we have things out on our website. We have community outreach meetings in the evenings so that we can pull in smaller businesses and minority businesses. And so whatever method, you know, the older or the new, you know, we're always sort of doing those community outreach, working with different organizations and agencies to get the word out that these projects are coming and that we want to, you know, have the community and some of these firms involved. And so, but in general, we've seen, you know, good numbers on the older methods, but even with now the CM at risk and the design build, we have been able to see higher percentages across the board on some of the numbers from the spending standpoint, from the contract spending side, on the MBE, on the FBE, VBE, and some of the small business. So we've seen higher numbers, 25-30% higher in general in the design build and the CMR than some of the more traditional design bid methods have been. So we've seen better numbers, and that typically has meant, you know, more firms from that sub tier 2 and tier 3 level. And we track it all the way down so that you could see the whole chain.
Thank you, Cindy, and we look forward to, you know, seeing more of those results across the board in our both public and private sector. Catherine, I see you've injected your question into our panel. So the which method leads to fewest change orders? So Joe, I don't know, can we identify which method leads to the fewest, or you know, anecdotally, are we just seeing that there are not as many needs for change orders because we have this intense collaboration at the, you know, front end of the project? I'll put it to both of you.
You know, I'd actually defer to Cynthia because she's got the wealth of practical experience there.
I would say that I haven't tallied it up, you know, from a number standpoint, but in general, I think we have seen the least amount of change orders probably in the design build, and then probably next CMR. I would definitely feel comfortable saying that the CMA is probably the highest because there is, you know, because people aren't brought in early. So that is why you see more questions and more change orders. Some change orders, it really depends on the project. You know, there's legitimate, you know, inconsistencies or missed, or like I said, I have an old building. So some of these things, you know, when you open up this old 1966 building, you're gonna have some surprises. And so, and there's a chance when you're doing the GMP to talk about, you know, factoring in some of that work, some of that contingency and allowance for that. But
thank you. All right, I see we're at 12:59, and I just want to thank everybody for their participation. I'm hoping that through this, you know, short hour, we've covered some of the major topics on what could be a pretty dry topic, but so important to our taxpayers. And, you know, certainly we'll follow up if we need to get more information into the public. And thank you again to each of you. I think that we've done a little bit to clear up some of the big picture. I mean, Joe, we didn't go into the last modern project delivery model, which is that general contracting, but that model doesn't bring us as many advantages. Any closing thoughts on that general contracting project delivery model?
Sure. Under the GC arrangement, the general contractor holds the subcontracts. It bids on completed drawings. It is best utilized for simpler projects,
Right.
relatively low, maybe $1 million projects where there's a lot of repetition. So if it's a bank branch that's been built, or a restaurant, or a tilt-up warehouse, it can be an effective delivery model, but it's certainly not the model for a $50 million hospital building or a $16 million jail.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. And also, Becky, our CEO for the Bar Association, has listed there in the chat box. We also, on our Bar Association website, we have a lot of the updates for the Justice Center. So stay tuned on that critically important project. And thank you again, everybody.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.